Thanks everyone for joining us today for our remote thought series. Although we do like to do these in person over dinner, we do welcome a larger audience when we have them remotely. So welcome. Our thought series events are meant to bring interesting and timely topics to you, none of which have to do with investments or estate planning, although with the current state of the markets, you might want to hear our thoughts on that subject. If so, we always have our quarterly client updates where our investment team provides up-to-date information on inflation and interest rates, the stock market, and other topics. Those investment webinars and these thought series presentations are all recorded and can be accessed from our homepage, cambridgetrust.com. And we are recording this presentation by Randy Pierce in case you miss anything and want to go back and listen to it again. After Randy's presentation, he'll take questions. So if something inspires you or you're wondering about something that Randy says, we ask that you type your question into the Q&A tab on your screen. We'll get as many questions answered for you as we can at the conclusion of Randy's talk. It is my extreme pleasure to introduce Randy Pierce, Dr. Randy Pierce. Born and raised in New Hampshire, Randy was active in band, drama, and several outdoor sports before he climbed his first mountain at the age of 10. Randy went on to earn his Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of New Hampshire and subsequently a doctoral degree. He began a successful career at Digital Equipment Corporation as a hardware design engineer, and at the age of 22, unexpectedly lost his vision over the course of 2 weeks due to a devastating neurological disease. Still passionate about sports, Randy found ways to continue to enjoy football, basketball, baseball, and even darts. In 2010, Randy set a goal to be the first blind hiker to summit all 48 of New Hampshire's 4,000 footers during summer hiking seasons over the next 10 years, a 10-year goal that he accomplished in 2, and in 2012, he hiked all 48 peaks in a single winter season. Randy went on to accomplish many more goals. In April 2015, he finished the Boston Marathon. In September that year, he traveled to Tanzania and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with a team of 10 of his friends, reaching the summit on September 26, 2015. Randy battled health problems in the winter of 2016, but still managed to complete the 2016 Boston Marathon in April that year. His passion for new experiences continues to encourage him to turn adversity into growth and opportunity, inspiring many to reach their peak potential as he has and continues to do. Earlier this year, Randy was selected to serve as president and CEO of Future Insight, formerly New Hampshire Association of the Blind, an organization that had provided support and instruction to him over the years, and one that Cambridge Trust is very honored to support. If you've had an opportunity to read Randy and Tracy, his wife's book, See You at the Summit, My Blind Journey from the Depths of Loss to the Height of Achievement, you will no doubt be inspired. Among many, I found a quote in the book to be inspirational. Randy said, "It took time for experience to allow me to see that it is better to focus on goals and solutions rather than restrictions. This discovery has shaped my life ever since." So please join me in welcoming Dr. Randy Pierce.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, for that warm introduction, the personal introduction, both when we met recently personally again at our festival and now here at this thought series. I want to start by thanking everyone who chooses to join us this afternoon. And I often start with gratitude, and I don't mean it in the superfluous way that starts lots of presentations, but I am deeply grateful that you made the choice to invest time to hear some of the adventure, maybe take some of this journey together. because I think that in this journey, there's the opportunity to think and experience a range of emotions that is powerful and important to go, I hope, vibrantly beyond, so that it'll resonate with you when this presentation is long over. And that's sort of the key to where this book came about. I've been doing this presentation in various forms throughout the last few decades. And in that process, people often get to the question and answering before the virtual era of typing it into the Q&A tab. And they would say to me, how did you develop the attitude, the mindset, the approach that led you to reach all of these experiences? And there is no short answer to that, which is why I took 104,000 words to do it in the book, See You at the Summit, which is the foundation of this. But that said, we will have time for that Q&A, and we will dig in deeply, and we will take a journey if you choose to invest with us along the way. So starting off right away, I call this presentation Reaching Our Peak Potential. The book is See You at the Summit. Literal and figurative summits are what we're talking about here. But reaching our peak potential is about how any of us can become the best we can be. In my journey, I didn't think I was going to be successful when blindness arrived, and I'm going to get to that. But I thought that I was going to be helpless and hopeless. And how did that change? And I've accomplished more now than I ever imagined before losing my sight. And I don't think it takes a loss of sight to do that. What it takes is an emphasis on vision. And that's why we also suggest, right, let's achieve a vision beyond your sight. As you suggested, Susan, in the introduction, I was very engaged in life, very active, very involved. Every sport, band, chorus, drama club, scouts, anything that kept me from doing schoolwork is really what I was trying to do in my youth. And while I did eventually get an aptitude in doing the right schoolwork, what I also did is learn 4 key lessons that I think are powerful, right? By being engaged, being involved, right? Attending thought series, what you get to do is you start learning some important things. In my life, I started to learn what was fun. And as simplistic as that sounds, what's fun is important, because if we can direct our life in things we enjoy, we're generally going to be happier. And in the most challenging times, if we know from a broad assortment of things that we enjoy, that can recharge us. How true in COVID, when some of the avenues we had might have been taken away or made more difficult, if we had more to rely on, it made us a little bit stronger, a little more resilient. And that was an important step for me. So obviously that's not what I was thinking about at 10 years old, but the roots were started. And a secondary root that comes in those 4 things was I started learning where my strengths are, because it's so important to understand your strengths and utilize them to help you on our path. Now, that doesn't mean I don't also find out where I'm weak and where there's room for growth, but I think there's room for growth in both of those, strengths and weakness. In fact, studies show very clearly that we grow exponentially more when we practice on our strengths. And that doesn't mean ignore the weaknesses by any stretch, but I like this notion, I've heard it often, that practice makes perfect. And I don't subscribe to that, because I don't know what perfect looks like. Not because I'm blind, but because how do you measure perfect? And ironically, it was a school presentation in Londonderry, New Hampshire, that introduced me to their concept, which was practice makes progress. And I love that, right? The more we do things, the better we're likely to get, no matter what it is. And that's a choice of one of those 4 things I began to focus on. Became more important later in life, as did the next 2, the final 2 points, which is that in being engaged and involved, it is very common to start needing to work with others. And that's where the simplistic acronym for team developed in my world, which is together, everyone achieves more. And I certainly subscribe to that. But I think teams can offer a lot more when you get to understand them. And specifically, I learned how to work with others. I learned how to understand a little bit what that role is. In fact, sometimes people think, I'll just find it easier to do this myself. And they may be right in the moment. But the whole notion of team is that if you know where someone else has a strength that might overcome an area where you don't, where somebody might look at a problem differently, that's the power of perception and inviting others. Well, that's all part of team. And if you shut that out, you never develop it. But if you practice makes progress at every opportunity, you get better at working with team. You develop those skills that are essential. I like to suggest that while I don't see, I apply some C words very powerfully in my world, which is how do we connect? How do we communicate? And how do we collaborate? Ironically, sometimes it's how do we commiserate, but that has its role too. The final lesson that I want to share in that group of 4 is that I not only learned how to work with others, but I started discovering how to help others work with me. Because the beauty as people is we have so much more in common than different. That's our foundation. That's where we build that communication and that trust. And if we do that, that lets us be able to understand that our differences can bring in a lot of value if approached in the right way. And one of those, obviously, when I went blind, became really powerful because people often want to help me. I really find that we live in a beautiful world, but frequently they don't know how to help, which doesn't always mean they don't just try anyhow, sometimes to my detriment, sometimes to our detriment. And the best way I can help that is to, in appreciation of the intent, educate on what I need to be at my best. And then conversely, to learn to listen to every person. What do they need to be at their best? And how do we bring that about? Now, those are all already deeper lessons than my youth might have drawn out, but they were there, they were foundational. And when I went blind, it really came into play. So let me address that journey. I was 1 year out of college. I had a great job. I felt like I was on top of the world, like I was reaching my peak potential. And that's when, in that span of 2 weeks, I lost all of the sight in my right eye and half in my left eye. It closed in like a tunnel. And I was in the hospital for almost 2 months as they were trying to understand it. And in my instance, I have a neurological disorder, and my optic nerve, the wire between my eye and my brain, was the first point of attack. And it was very abrupt, very sudden, very unexpected. And I was angry. I was frustrated. Why did this happen to me? How will I ever do anything? But instead of asking that, what I really said is, I can't do anything. I feel helpless and hopeless. And fortunately, I didn't stay there because this isn't a pity story by any means, as hopefully the introduction and the book, for those of you who've worked your way through it, might know. But the reality is, I had to get a little support, a little guidance to start that process. But once I did, there's a quote by Henry Ford in which he says, "Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're probably right." And I love the notion, right? When you don't believe in yourself or your goals or objectives, it's very hard to succeed. But believing starts the changing of that. Now, it's not magic. It's not believe, achieve, you're done, right? But believing is the first step. Then you have to do some problem solving, maybe a little perseverance, but really it's doing the work to get the results that you hopefully want. And when I share that, all right, I found the places that guide me. In fact, ironically, I'm here as the new CEO at Future Insight, which I love my role. I'm excited to come to work every day. That doesn't mean it's not challenging on plenty of occasions. But I first came to this organization 33 years ago when I felt that helpless and hopeless, and the right guidance to get a little training to understand how. And someone with experience can help you in that way so powerfully. I mean, to some extent, that's why we're here with Cambridge Trust, but it's more than that, right? In my world, it was as simple as, the first day I wanted to brush my teeth when I was totally blind. How much toothpaste is coming out, and is it going on my toothbrush? And the answer to that question was more than I expected, and a lot more places than my toothbrush. But the good news is there's an easy solution. And in training, you learn that it's your toothpaste, and you hold it up to your mouth and you squeeze it into your mouth where you can feel how much is coming out, and there's no spillage because you're putting it right where you're going to use it, right? And I use that solution today, and some of you are thinking about it, but you know what? My bathroom sink counter is probably cleaner than some of yours. And the simple reality is, if somebody's already solved the problem, that's a great place to start. And it may not work for you. And I'm going to dig into that in a minute, but first I want to show you how we start climbing. It's the cover of my book, but it's also one of my favorite slides. So Renee, would you flip to slide 2 for me, which is the favorite photo I have of Quinn and I in the Winter Summit. And Quinn was my second guide dog. I'm on my 4th currently, but Quinn and I did all of those 4,000 foot peaks in one winter. And this is Mount Monroe. We're at 5,200 feet. And what I love about this photo is that his muzzle is pointing like an arrow up to the summit, which is still about 30 yards away. The slope is incredibly steep there, and that's a craggy, rocky peak, but the snow coverage has made it smooth, but you can tell the steepness. And I love the golden sunlight basking and making his golden fur pop against that blue sky background. And I know some of you were thinking, ironically, how does a blind guy have a favorite photo? And here I'm describing it, hopefully aptly, because I've used the sight of others to share with me different favorite moments in the photo. Some people like that I'm hunched over and tired, which was a theme of my life with Quinn. But what I like is some messages behind the photo, right? In order to reach our peak, the summit of a mountain, I think all of us, to reach our peak, sometimes need a little guidance. In my case, the dogs have been a part of that journey. Quinn certainly the others before him and after him. But the reality is this, right? I'm just not following. They're not guiding, taking me wherever they want. We all are still accountable for ourselves. And we invite that guidance to hopefully support us in the ways we need. If I left it to my guide dogs, I'd be at the dog park every day, all day. And that's not going to serve me. And that's not going to serve us, right? So it's taking the accountability to know how to use the guidance, when to accept it, and to realize that there are times we're leading, even when we're accepting guidance, especially in our terms of our life. There's a second thing behind the photo that I think is really powerful, which is that, right, I'm choosing to climb a mountain, and it's hard work. It's particularly hard work blind. Now, that said, why? Because when faced with a challenge, we're helping ourselves, right? The lack of challenge is stagnation. And in stagnation, we're not growing, we're not learning. But when we invite that challenge, it gives us the opportunity. And that's why I like to think of it as positive adversity, right? When I went blind, I didn't think of that as positive adversity. In fact, a lot of people thought it was one of the worst things that could ever happen to me. And at the time, so did I. But that's not how I view it today. Because what I realized is that adversity faced me with a choice. I could say, I can't, I won't, I quit. And at first I did a little bit, and that's okay too, right? Change is hard, whatever the format. But it's hard as long as you choose to focus on that. And it starts getting easier the moment you turn your focus to, where do I want to go? Here's where I am. I understand it. That's the definition of resiliency. Here's where I am. Here's where I want to go. Now I just have to find the path. And that's what I also see in that photo. This notion that positive adversity is something we can choose. That's the goal setting that Susan alluded to in my quote. Goals are positive adversity. And there's 3.5 really good reasons to do them in my mind. I'll give you the first 3 now, the half on a later slide. But the first is, by setting a goal, we're more likely to bring something positive of that positive adversity into our lives than if we don't. And if we want positive things, let's try to bring them in. Second, it's the practice makes progress mentality. By setting goals and striving to reach them, you get better at it, which brings you the skills and the tools you need to do that in the future. And it starts becoming easier and easier to reach goals, to reach those positive things. And that also, by the way, those same tools can apply to the negative adversity that you didn't plan on. And the third and final thing I'll show right now, there is a half coming, is that I think in doing this, you develop confidence. I certainly did. And that confidence helps change the way I approach things. People often think in the many adventures that I'm going to share that you may know glimpses of now, that I am a risk taker. And like many before me, I like to think that I'm not a risk taker, I'm a problem solver. And a problem solver can do everything a risk taker does with more success and fewer setbacks. So that's the mindset, and that confidence it developed has guided many of my lives, because one of the risks that I think we fail to address so often is that we say, if I do this, this might happen, that's easy. But we don't say, what if I don't do this? What might happen? That's the other side of the risk management question that too often goes unasked and unanswered. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of quick hiking anecdotes before I actually will flip a slide and show you, but not yet, Renee, please. And the reason I want to give you these hiking anecdotes is because I think they add power to what I'm saying. You know, when I first wanted to hike, I found a blind mountain climber, right? Find somebody who's already solved the problem. And Eric Weinmeier is amazing. He's totally blind. He's climbed the 7 summits, the tallest mountain on every continent. And I had a chance to hike with him because he wanted to know how I got my 2nd degree black belt and could he do martial arts, which I thought, you climbed Everest. I have a pretty good idea you can handle martial arts. But we went for a hike and I learned some of his techniques. And Eric uses his hand on the back of a pack and he follows along, and it worked really great for him. And it worked good for me. What's the difference? Well, Eric's about 5'8" and I am 6'4", which may not be obvious on this Zoom call, but that means I am taller than most of the humans I might try to guide with. And that meant I was hitting my head on the branches in the White Mountains. And I am not somebody who prefers to hit his head a lot. And as such, I realized there was another solution I could pioneer, using a guide dog who structurally is designed to look up easier and who's trained their whole life to be attentive to those things, where my friends, in all fairness, have a whole other lives and careers besides guiding me up a mountain path. And so when they're on that mountain path and they are prone to looking at our feet, which are twisty, rocky roots, I think I can be understanding. So I love the notion of getting that pioneer solution, which as it turned out worked great with my guide dogs. So I still do it today. And I happen to know over 20 teams who are doing it now.
On December 22nd.
As a result, oops, Sorry about that, Renee. So I want to share one last journey about that, which is that when I started with my guide dogs, we went up a small mountain. You take small steps and you learn. And it was Pac Monadnock in Wilton, New Hampshire. And he was fantastic because a guide dog avoids obstacles, right? Sort of like our supports do in our financial industry, in our work industry. If we do it right, we help people avoid obstacles. And in my part, right, I followed his lead. He took me around them until there was an obstacle we couldn't avoid, we had to face. And he stops. That's the intelligent disobedience technique, whereby they refuse to go until I show them by tapping the obstacle that I know that it's there. And in this case, it was a 3-foot step up we had to take because they do not build mountains to OSHA standards. That's unfortunate for some. But I have long legs and I can take a 3-foot step. So I tapped the step to show him I knew it was there. I scanned above my head with my hiking stick, which was in my offhand. And I said to my guide dog, Quinn, I said, hop up. That's the command for a guide dog that says, go if you can. And what he did is back up, which is a guide dog response of, no way, this is a bad idea. Now, here's where I went awry. You see, I tapped again, scanned again, and I said, I need to show him because he's got to learn how he can help me to do this. And I took a big step up and bam, I hit my head. Because there was a branch the size of my thigh that was just out of my outstretched hand. But it turns out my guide dog is better at math than me. And he had said 3-foot steps, 6'4", you're going to hit that. And there he was wriggling like, I told you, I told you. And what I learned from that is, right, I'm climbing a mountain for the first time totally blind. He's trained his whole life. Ignoring him is a bad idea. Trust the process. Now, any process that's worth its existence can be challenged, but there's an appropriate way. There's a risk management way to do it. And I didn't do that. So I learned, last anecdote before I will ask Renee to flip, so not yet, please. But here's the last anecdote. I'm hiking in the winter, and my secret is that my hardest challenge is footing. And in the winter, it becomes smooth and it becomes easier for me to hike because my biggest challenge goes away. I get new challenges, right? You can have deep snow, you can have howling winds and cold temperatures, but you can solve those problems. Footing is just hard work. And as we were walking along in the winter, my guide dog stopped, intelligent disobedience, to warn me, and I scanned and I found the branch that I would have hit my head on. So I tapped the branch to show him I knew where it was, and off we went. And then he stopped again a little further up. And I scanned and I couldn't find anything. Nothing footing, nothing up at my head. So I said, hop up, go if you can. And he inched forward, which was his way of telling me, you're missing it. So I repeated this a couple of times and I started to get frustrated. And you know, frustration is something I've had to deal with a lot. And I've started learning that there's a simple technique, right? Frustration is a reaction. It's emotional. And what we want in our lives are responses because they're thoughtful. How do you go from one to the other? And I like to suggest it's as easy as ABC. A, awareness that what you are doing is emotional and a reaction. B, breathe. And breathing takes time, which delays us, but it also physiologically, it calms us. It releases the enzymes we need to switch from that reactionary emotional state to thoughtful, because the C is consider. What do you want to have happen? What are the results here? What's really going on? C could also be curious, right? In that instance, we did get curious. And I asked Justin, who was traveling with me, because I don't want to hit my head. I said, can you see what's happening here? And he said, yeah, there's another branch, but it's still quite a ways in front of you. I don't know why he's stopping so early. There was the battle with frustration again. But I started forward with my arm up. And as we walked and got closer and closer to it, of course, I can't see it, but my guide dog started to tuck behind me, but wagging his tail harder and harder. That was what he was worried about. And when I reached the branch and he's tucked behind me, I was a little frustrated, and we learned what happened. It was really simple, you see. When I tapped the branch, all the snow, winter in New England, fell off the branch and onto his head. And he didn't like that very much, and he wasn't going to fall for it again. And how often in our worlds do we get a reaction different than what we expect? And instead of getting curious, we just make some assumptions. Once we learned, it was easy to problem solve and develop a new technique. So if he stopped and curled in front of me, I knew not to tap, but I also knew I could just reach up and find it softly and move forward. And I share that because, right, it's all about learning and growing and being open-minded. With that, Renee, would you flip slide for me, please?
On December 22nd, 2011, Randy Pierce and his service dog Quinn began their quest to hike all 48 of New Hampshire's 4,000 footers in a single winter season.
I'm Randy Pierce. I'm a totally blind hiker. If I told you the numbers of people in New Hampshire that are blind, you'd be stunned. It's an invisible malady because when people go blind, all too often, they hide. I had confidence that I would give my all, but I had no confidence that that was enough.
Four More Feet. Coming May 2012.
You know, it's very fun, a little exciting to have a couple of movies about life's adventures, and I do have a couple, and I feel really fortunate for that. It is not, however, particularly fun to fall off the side of a mountain while wearing a GoPro camera. But there's good news here, and it's a couple of bits of good news. First off, nobody was hurt seriously, and we were able to all train to take wilderness first aid to be able to help each other out if something went awry. But secondly, it wasn't me that fell. It was a fully sighted friend of mine, Justin Sylvester, and I love the man. I'm glad he wasn't hurt. But I want to dig in for a moment to why he fell and why I didn't. It's that risk management thing, right? When we got to the slopes, this was on Mount Whiteface, northeast of Lake Winnipesaukee, and it gets steep and it's often icy because it faces south. And I said, I think we should put on our micro spikes. It's something that you stretch over your boot that gives a good grip into the traction into the snow and ice. And he said, I don't think we need them. Well, you know, a couple of things. First off, I think he believes me now that we needed them. But secondly, right, I want to understand, why didn't he put his on? And so I asked him after the fall, I said, well, why didn't you wear them? Like, what was the reason not to put them on? And he said, honestly, Ray, it was so cold, I was worried that if we took the time to dig them out of our packs and put them on and close up our packs and get them back on, we would get too cold. And that's fair. That's a risk assessment. But there's another lesson about communication in my mind, right? You need to have candid, earnest communications if you're going to be part of a team, if you want to be able to accomplish things. Because then I could have said to him, well, what can we do to stay warm? What, you know, maybe we could do some calisthenics, because there's risks both ways, both to not putting them on or to risking the cold. But here's the other thing. I said, help me understand this, because I took that time and put mine on. What did you do during that time? And he said, honestly, I crossed my arms and I glared at you. Well, glaring at a blind person isn't going to be very helpful for you or me, right? But what I understand is what he did is something we all can do at times. He made a decision for a reason that made sense to him. And after that, he stopped really factoring things in. He locked onto that. And to make the best decisions, we always want to be open to the best information. And that requires, right, candid communication. Another thing I want to draw forth on this is not just that, well, it said 4,000 people who are blind or legally blind or visually impaired in New Hampshire. That number's 22,000 today, because baby boomers have started into the fold of getting age-related macular degeneration. So the need is higher. But I want to talk another piece is the title of the film. 4 More Feet is obviously the 4 more feet of my guide dogs is how I hike, but that wasn't the source. It was a double entendre. You see, we did a winter traverse of the presidential range, the northern presidential range. So Mount Madison, Mount Adams, Mount Jefferson, and ended on Mount Washington. Oh, actually ended off of Mount Washington after crossing the summit. And let me tell you, that was a lot of hard work. You're above tree line for 8 miles. And we had all the right preparation. And we certainly knew and where we would have to change any of our plans if things went awry. But it was still hard work. And as we were closing in on the summit of Mount Washington, it was minus 27 with the wind chill. There were winds at 50 miles an hour. And we had the right gear, we were prepared, but I was still tired. And there was a classic moment where they were filming, but I didn't know it. And the reason will become obvious in a second. And what happened is I stopped. Quinn and I were getting close to the summit. We knew it, but I was tired. It'd been such a long day and I knew I had energy reserves, but I just wanted to know how much further. So I stopped and I was like, how much further? And Justin shouted over the winds. He said, 4 more feet. You see, I had stopped 4 feet from the summit. They were filming because they were going to get this epic shot of blind man and guide dog reaching the summit of Washington on their own. And what they got instead was blind man whining about being tired. And I'll own that happily, right? Because I was tired. But what was interesting is after he said that, I was like, 4 more feet? Really 4 feet? And Quinn's like, yeah, it's right there. So I took the one step and I'm on the summit and I had so much energy. I wasn't tired anymore. And why? Right? I didn't drink a Gatorade. I didn't eat a power bar, and no, they are not sponsoring me. But if you have connections, send me a note after this talk. But the reality is what changed was my mental state. What was I focused on? If you want to carry all the baggage of what you've been through with you, it gets heavier and harder. And as soon as you can understand it enough to let it go and focus on how close you're getting to your goals, what's required to get to them, it's a lighter load. Now, there's more to share on that front, but I just think that's a powerful point. Renee, would you flip slide to the group of hikers? It should be the next one. And this is my final summit. We're on East Cannon, which is not quite the actual summit. And that beautiful Lafayette Ridge is in the background. And I share this because it's my 48th peak in one winter. And that was sort of historic. And what we knew is those people had hiked with me, and they didn't hike with me every time, but all of them had contributed to the experience, to the journey in some positive way. And that's team. And I knew at the summit, Cannon Mountain had a tram that was taking up several news crews and a lot of my friends who don't hike that wanted to be part of the celebration, which is great. But here's the lesson, right? So for me, it's easy to get my eyes on the prize and forget sometimes in our journey. But that day I didn't, because building a team is easier than maintaining a team. And one of the healthiest tips I ever learned was from Dr. Maya Angelou, who said, people will forget what you say and people will forget what you do long before they will ever forget how you made them feel. Now, obviously, what you say and what you do affects how people feel, but it's how they feel that they're going to remember. And in that instance, right, I wanted to make sure our team felt like they belonged, that they mattered. That's important because you're not just trying to avoid the negatives, you're trying to add the positives. And as I got up to that summit, Justin, Quinn, and I were the first ones there because practice makes progress. We'd become good hikers. And when the next people arrived, they said, can we go to the summit? I said, absolutely, but I'm going to wait for the rest of the team so that we will all arrive at the summit to celebrate together. And the last 2 people were a fair bit behind us. And when they came up and realized we'd waited, they went from shoulders slumped and heads down to smiling and excited because they know it mattered. And I know that because they each wrote me a note to tell me how much that moment mattered. And I just think that's an important way to memorize. Last thing I'll say about team in this moment is just this. I gave you the easy acronym. Let me give you the tougher one that I think is powerful. In our lives, we all should be able to do what I ask on this next thing. We should write down the names of people who fit these categories to help us in our life. T, who's trusted and true in your world? Who's your friends that you tell anything to? I hope you have some. And if not, maybe it should be a goal to build some. E, who are the eager and enthusiastic encouragers in your world? Who are your cheerleaders? Who help keep you motivated when you might lose a little of that? A, who are your accountability partners, right? Who tell you when you're doing the things you shouldn't, and who tell you when you're doing things who aren't doing the things you should? Because both of those are important lessons that an accountability person can give you the harsh candor we need in our world. And M, who are your mentors, right? Who are your coaches? Who are your teachers? We all can benefit from them. And then I'll turn it around because there are certainly more than those 4, but those core 4 will take you far. But the way I turn it around is then think about who you might be serving those roles for in your life, because giving, in my experience, is even more powerful than receiving. And if you're doing both, getting that and giving that, and it may be to different groups of people, then you start filling your life in a more wholesome, balanced way, in my opinion. Now, all that said, one of the things that my many friends and teammates do for me is they bring on new challenges. And one of the challenges they did after the 48 is suggested, I think you should do a Tough Mudder. And I said, what's a Tough Mudder? And it's an obstacle course, 10 to 12 miles, designed originally for British Special Forces. And when they first told me about it, I didn't know. Well, there's a quote by John Wooten I love, which is, we don't plan to fail, we fail to plan. So I don't want to do that, right? If you just try things, you can have some success. But if you make a plan, and a good one, you're going to have more success and fewer setbacks, kind of like that problem-solving approach. So we studied how it had been done, what the obstacles were like. Somebody had tried it sight impaired, and we learned. And we went up to the Great Northeast Tough Mudder in Maine, and my team was amazing. We together were able to get all of us through every obstacle. And the folks at Tough Mudder said, we think the world should see this. We'd like to fly you out to California. We'd like to film you doing this. Remember that confidence, point 3 in my 3.5 reasons? I said yes, because I knew sharing this could have a positive impact. I just didn't realize how much. And right after I agreed to that, they told me that out in California, they were releasing all new obstacles. So we'd have to learn again. One of which you're going to see it in this video that's coming up in a moment. I described the moment in here as the start of my book, actually. But the moment that was really challenging, there were plenty of them, was they asked me to climb 25 feet up a tower with water down below. They asked me to jump 9 feet out and grab a trapeze bar and swing on that trapeze bar. And at the end of the swing, let go. And as I'm going through the air, try to ring a bell that's hanging in midair. That sounds ludicrous to me, even with sight. And without sight, how were we going to do it? Well, my team watched and we studied where were people failing, because only 1 out of 10 people succeeded. And at the biggest failure point, we said, we got to do something different. And one of them had an idea. And that's the power of perspective yet again. So with that in mind, well, let's watch. Renee, would you flip slide for me, please?
I am Randy Pierce, and for about 20 years now, I've been totally blind, and that's going to make this Tough Mudder a little more challenging.
I'll go back. Second round. Oh, okay, you're gonna.
You know, the truth is, going blind was really hard. I thought everything fun and everything important in my life was no longer possible, and it's just ludicrous to me because now I, climb mountains and run marathons and do Tough Mudders, and our message here, really for us, is we're out living the life that we believe, right? That there aren't obstacles, there are opportunities.
Tough Mudder, 10.5 miles of just awfulness. Hey, hey! Come away.
Keep moving forward, Randy.
Go backwards so I can talk better. I reached up, felt gently, found where the bar was, put my hand not on it so I knew my head wouldn't hit it. Gotcha.
My life isn't about my blindness, it's about the choice I made and how to respond.
Bring your hand down. There you go. That's the swing. I don't feel bad. I gave everything I could. That's my goal every time, right?
The more I invest in life and be in those moments, the more rewards I keep getting. Learning to look at the world differently is the key to really having vision, and vision is always going to be way more important than sight.
Look at this video that's gone viral of Randy Pierce participating in a Tough Mudder challenge, despite being blind. Randy jumped in a trapeze, swung out, and rang a bell only 10% of contestants managed to touch.
Every day in my life, I wish I could see. But I would choose to be blind to learn all the lessons I've learned, to come to this point in my life and have so many great people around me that I wouldn't change it. And blindness, if that's what it took for me to get here and have such a wonderful life, then I welcome it.
So I love the shirt that they gave us, right? I see no obstacles, because of course I can't see the obstacles. But the truth is, for all of us, it's really more about how do we look at an obstacle. It's right back to that first point when I went blind, when I was thinking, I can't, I won't, I quit. We can say that on any obstacle. Or we can say, this is where I want to learn. This is where I want to grow. This is where I maybe want to collaborate to become something a little bit better and more capable in ways that will make a difference for me. And the beauty is you can always choose to change your mindset and start that problem solving and resilient approach. Because I didn't always start out that way. I will say this, they put on my guide dog, Autumn, a shirt that says, I see no obstacles. And I really hope my guide dogs see the obstacles, or I'm going to be in a lot of trouble in this world. I do want to change directions again, though. And I want to ask Renee if she'll flip slide. And this is a picture of me. Another pioneering option that Quinn brought to my life was running. and specifically running road races. Prior to this time, this is 2013, this is the Boston Athletic Association 5K road race, the day before the Boston Marathon. That's when it was traditionally held. And that was our, I don't know, probably around 27th race. We ran 33 together, he and I. And in that journey of running road races together, right, we learned it was to get us in better shape for hiking, but I learned I had a passion for it. I had an aptitude for it. And there were 9,800 other runners in that race when we crossed that finish. And we had to sort of educate to be there, but I didn't bump a single person. That's hard for some of my sighted friends to manage. And my dog managed that, guiding me. It's just amazing to me. It highlights the focus on ability awareness, right? I think we all have disabilities, things we can't do. See is one of mine. And if they're important to me, I go out and resolve them in different ways. And in this instance, when we did this, the Boston Athletic Association, they took that picture, they put it up on their website, their social media to celebrate, as they titled it, ability awareness. And I was so proud when they put that up the day after we had done it. But all of that got shattered because the day after we ran that very flag display in that was where the Boston Marathon bombing took place. And this flag was shredded, as were some lives. And I share that because when people don't learn how to communicate in healthy ways, when we don't learn how to resolve differences in healthy ways, really terrible things can happen for all of us. And when it happens, it's not just at the epic stage like the Boston Marathon, it happens in our everyday lives where we let little disagreements grow into more because we don't choose to connect and communicate and work through those, right? And if we do, we learn that in communication, the two things we don't want is silence or violence, literal or otherwise. And maybe silence is even more dangerous. So learn to do that and you ease your life, the lives of those around you, and it trickles up to our world. I really believe that. But what you can do when it has happened and gone awry, like at the Boston Marathon, is you can choose where you're going to put your focus. Understand what happened, but don't carry that baggage. Put your focus forward and say, how do I respond? Right. And in my instance, one of my responses was I said, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon next year. I want to be a part of that. I'd never run a marathon or anything close to that distance. And what I knew is I wanted to be part of a community that responded with hope, that responded to celebrate the elite human spirit, not just the elite athletes, because that's the key about Boston. That marathon celebrates people who run to support causes that are amazing, to support people that they just experience things that are incredible. And sometimes people run with challenges that are amazing. I just wanted to be part of that. And unfortunately, I failed. And if you haven't learned from some of the things that have happened so far, failure is okay. Because failure is temporary if you don't quit, right? Failure is temporary if you choose a path of perseverance and resiliency. And the statistics say that an average executive is going to fail 3.8 times per success. I hope I have a better success rate than that, but that's the whole planning part. What I did, however, in failing is start trying to be gentle to myself because I can drive myself a little hard. I think some of us can. And the trick is you can't hate yourself to perfection. In fact, self-care is so important in our life. It's not selfish. If we don't learn ways to take care of ourselves, treat ourselves the way we'd want to treat others, we might get ourselves into a lot of trouble, right? In this instance, I had a really good reason why I failed. It's a really terrible reason, but the truth is my boy Quinn that year came down with osteosarcoma, bone cancer on his skull, and it was terminal. There's nothing they could do. But there wasn't nothing I could do. There was something I could do. And what I could do was give him all the love and support and care he needed every step of the way. And that meant I couldn't go out to train to qualify for Boston because it's 16 weeks of training to run a marathon just to get a qualifier and then 16 more weeks for Boston. I didn't know how much time he had, but I knew he deserved all the time I could give him. And so I didn't leave him for that. And Quinn took his last breath on January 20th, 2014. Too late for me to go for Boston. And I made a different promise. Not I'm going to run next year's Boston Marathon, but I was going to dedicate that year to running into him. And I ran 2,020 miles that year. I ran out and qualified in Providence, Rhode Island for the Boston Marathon. And then I took that and ran out to California where the United States Association of Blind Athletes has their championship. And I won that championship. And there's some fun stories there. But what really mattered to me, and simplicity for our time, I'm going to ask Renee to flip slide for me. I came back and ran Boston 1 year late. My promise was fulfilled, and I don't begrudge that delay at all, right? Because I don't ever want excuses. I'll accept the reasons as long as those reasons don't prevent me. They just may affect how and where I deliver something. And in that, there's a story that I think is powerful and worth sharing. You see, when I run a marathon, I dedicate a mile, every mile on the course, to someone who makes my life better. My wife gets mile 1 and 26 because she deserves double. But in that one, I dedicated mile 20 to 21 to Quinn, because that's Heartbreak Hill. And it was pretty bad weather, not the worst Boston's ever seen, because it's outdid itself in 2017. But in that year, it was 42 degrees. It was pouring rain much of the time. So I was cold and wet and miserable some of the time. And in truth, when I finished, I was really proud and I ran strong. But somebody pointed me to a blog post a woman had written that I didn't know. And what she said was this, roughly. She said, I was on my first Boston Marathon. I was at the base of Heartbreak Hill. I was cold. I was wet. I was miserable. And I was ready to quit. And then this big guy ran by me with a line of people drafting behind him. And I realized that if I could get in that line and let them all break the wind and the rain, that maybe I could get up this last hill and finish my marathon. So that's what I did. And as we're running, I realized he's holding a blind cane and there's a woman guiding him through the course. And we're all following a blind man up this hill. And when he got to the top, he put his head back and he shouted into the storm, "This hill could never break my heart. I love you, Quinn boy," which is what I shouted. And that's the key here, because afterwards, she said, then the two of them sped up and left us behind. And I don't know what made them so strong, but I wish I did. So I wrote her an email and shared that. And I'm going to tell you, right? I'm not strong every day. I've had plenty of weak marathons. I've had plenty of weak moments in my life. In fact, I think the ability to be vulnerable is of greater strength than anything else. But the truth is, I was strong that day. And the reason was because I had purpose behind me. I was running that for Quinn. And I love Quinn every day. He's not my purpose every day, right? My purpose is connecting with people in meaningful ways to hopefully invite them to think, maybe to laugh, maybe to cry, because that's okay too. But experience whatever range of emotions and thoughts will help you grow and learn. And if any of this resonates with you, I hope you might consider that very thing, right? Doctors can sometimes call it the prescription of purpose, but when you have purpose behind what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work. And that's the gift. That's why I love coming to work every day. I'm going to go through a couple of slides quickly to get us to where there's a couple more points, but each slide has so many anecdotes. So Renee, would you flip slide for me? And what we see here is I am hiking. Sorry, give me 1 second. This is at Mount Liberty and it's flags on the 48. And I share that just because I got to experience how people respond to adversity to the 9/11 disaster. And very specifically, what happened is, on the day it happened, a few hikers climbed and raised an American flag. And they thought about all the first responders, all the people who give our life so many gifts and freedoms. There's negative there, and it deserves enough attention to understand, but there's so much positive in the choice they made and how to respond. And I just share and emphasize that. Being part of that experience, I saw that in spades. And in my life, I realized that's true, right? People will tell you all the time that you get power in knowing there's a choice in how you respond to anything, adversity of any type. And I think that's true. But what I think also needs to be stated is, the truth is, the choice you make will have a bigger impact on your life than any challenge ever could. So in that is the accountability, right? You own that. Your choice reaps you the reward either way. If you make a bad choice, you respond poorly, it's a little bit your fault. Now, obviously, the adversity is still real. I'm not trying to victim blame here, but I also know that you have the accountability and choice to find a way to handle it differently that will also give you the better reward. I think about my life and my journey. You know, I went into a wheelchair. I didn't share that. That's part of my neurological disorder. It continues, but I worked my way out. But every step of the way, I was always thinking, you know, these are hard. These are real. Each day, I still have bad days today. But I always thought, what if I had quit when I first went legally blind? What if I'd have quit 11 years later when I went totally blind? What if I'd have quit 4 years later when I went into a wheelchair? I would have missed so many amazing moments that are still part of my everyday journey. And I'll ask a better question. How lucky am I that I made the choice to find the way forward to get to all the gifts that lie ahead of us when we make that choice? I'm going to ask you to flip slide for me again, Renee. And this is a hike with Teddy Bruschi. And Teddy Bruschi was a linebacker for the New England Patriots who shares my birthday. And that's where our friendship began. There's a lot more to the story, but Teddy had a stroke. And while I was in the wheelchair is when Teddy had trouble seeing out of each eye, each quadrant, and he had trouble walking. And he reached out because here's one of his friends, one of his fans who's blind and in a wheelchair. And he says, how do you manage the challenge? How do you do that? And I said, I've got a book, 104,000 words. No, I didn't have the book yet. But the reality is I try to answer some of those questions, which is how do we build positive momentum in our lives? And there's a lot more to that story, but I love the ripples of influence, right? Teddy Bruschi agreed to hike because he was going to join a program to help raise awareness for soldiers coming back with injuries that didn't believe in themselves, didn't believe in their ability, and they returned to communities that might not believe in their abilities. And so they climbed Mount Kilimanjaro together. And Teddy, as a celebrity hiker, agreed and didn't know how to hike. So he asked a blind man from New Hampshire to teach him. Well, there's some powerful statements. And when he got there, the soldier that he led on the final day was a woman who had lost her sight from shrapnel. And the teamwork and the things we had learned, he could apply to help her. And the two of them reached the summit together. How powerful, right? You never know the ripples of influence. So think about that when you try to influence positively in your world. Flip slide for me, Renee. And this is the Grand Canyon. And, you know, quickly on this one, the power of this story is very simply that it's my wife and I's wedding honeymoon that we went there. And I'm on the edge of the Grand Canyon. And before we got married, I don't remember her putting me on the edge so dangerously, but I also hiked down Bright Angel Trail with her and Quinn. And as we hiked, I discovered the footing out there is easier than our White Mountains. And so I hiked easily, comfortably, naturally. And I was passing people who at times would say, hey, you can't have a dog here. And I'd say, oh, it's my service dog. I'm totally blind. And they'd say, no, you're not. And what are we going to do? Play the poke eye game, right? How am I going to prove to them I'm blind? And the answer is I don't have to. I just have to understand the very notion they had was they couldn't envision a blind person doing what I was doing. And neither could I when I first went blind. And in our lives, how many times are we daunted by a task only because it's the next one? We've already proven we could do it. It's good to take a look at how far you've come and all you've accomplished to let that help you build strength too. And I had come a long way and learned a lot. Would you flip slide for me, please? This is a scramble with Quinn and Boots up Mount Washington on the Ammonoosuc Ravine. And I'll just show you how much harder the terrain is there or here in the whites. And also that we take care of our partners. That's why he's wearing those boots. There's a couple other stories, but I'm going to flip slide again, Renee, to a split screen. So you can see the ease of walking on snow. And, you know, there's another look in there on the other side where Quinn is looking back and I've got a human guide. And he's looking back like he has a union contract on guiding me because he took that approach. But the right guide for the right occasion. We were about to go down the Mount Willie ladders, which are, as you might suspect, virtual ladders built into the side of a cliff. And we had practiced before. So I knew how Quinn could handle it and I knew how I could handle it. And the truth is neither of us could do it if we were together. That's where I needed a different guide. So think about that when you choose. Who is your guide in any situation? They may need to change. Would you flip slide for me? And I just shared this with my guide dog Autumn because there's been so many Quins and I'm working with Swirl now, but the truth is in our lives, our guides change. And hopefully we can be open-minded to hold them accountable to the tasks that they need that are consistent of their roles, but give them the freedom to express themselves as they do it. Don't expect it has to be by exactly an unnecessary, arbitrary process. Because Autumn was very different than Quinn. She was a joyous, jubilant, loving, capable guide dog. And Quinn was a serious, all business, let's get to work. Whether it's work or play, we got to do it seriously. They're both very different. And if I tried to force her to be Quinn, we'd have spent our life fighting each other and she would be disappointed and I might have. Instead, I got the gifts of everything she had because I took that mindset. And the most important person for us to do that with in our lives is ourselves. You should be free to change, to be the author of your own book, whether it's See You at the Summit or otherwise. We can change our lives. If we think something should be different, just be patient with others as they learn to see that there's a change coming. Would you flip slide for me, please, Renee? I often describe the sunset and then ask people to see it after I've described it, but I did that enough in the cover for my book. I'm going to let this go and just let you share this beauty. And nature can be awe-inspiring. And how lucky am I to hear its description from so many different people? I get all of the best aspects of everything. And it's where I say the difference between sight versus vision really emerges. Sight lets you see everything around you right now. I can't do that. But vision lets you see everything around you right now in a different way and all the possibilities that can come from it. And that I think is more powerful. And you don't have to have sight to have vision. But you know what? You don't get vision just because you have sight. You get vision because you choose to look at the world mindfully, deliberately, And maybe it'll be in a little different way after this presentation. Would you flip slide for me, please? And thank you, Renee. And this is Gray Jay Magic. Remember, I said 3.5 reasons? This is a gray jay. It's a rare bird, only lives at high elevation or northern latitudes, and it's eating out of the palm of my hand like I'm in a Disney Pixar film. And when you are engaged and involved, and when you're setting goals and working towards them, you're going to sometimes achieve goals you never expected. I'm in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. I was named the ultimate fan. Well, what does that mean? I yell well? No, there's a lot more to that story. But that all came about from other goals. In this, I was climbing a mountain, but the bird eating out of my hand, well, that was magic. And if you don't think so, that gentleman in the picture is a friend of mine who likes to think of himself as a manly man, tough guy. I never show emotion. But you tell me that's not awe and wonder on his face. Would you flip slide for me, Renee? And this is a picture that has so many gifts, but it is my favorite photo because it's the last photo of my boy hiking. We didn't know about his cancer then. And what a gift it is to have that photo. And it took a lot of experiences to be open-minded to have this photo come to reality. But I won't dig into that story because it's time to flip slide and take some questions, because this is Kilimanjaro. This is the summit, and mountain summits are important. I'll see you at the summit, as I say, but what are we going to do there? The work's not done. Whenever you reach a great achievement, hopefully you're not finished. Hopefully you're going to do more with your life, which is what's next, but not in the rush way, because relaxation, recharge, those are all parts of the equation. But what a great place to reflect and review and think. You know, in a mountain case, I have to hike down. And boy, off Kilimanjaro, that's a lot of work. But we've covered a lot of ground. So let me invite your questions, because we spent about 55 minutes together already. And while Renee is looking out to pick some highlights from questions, I just want to share that I do have one more slide and one final point I'll wrap up with. But what do you have for me for questions, whoever may be sharing them with me?
Randy, whatever possessed you to do the Tough Mudder?
Well, you know, when you say you like the notion of adversity and that obstacles are things you can overcome, an obstacle course resonates with, let's demonstrate that you can overcome it. And, you know, I didn't, again, go into it with the risk-taking mode. I went into the problem-solving mode. And if I'd have thought it was too uncomfortable, I wouldn't have done it. There are some things I say no to. My friends are like, hey, you want to go to the parking lot? I'll let you drive my car. It'll be wide open. And I'm like, no, because the risks there of what I could hit or who I could hit, including myself and the person in the car with me, just aren't worth the things of driving, right? So I say no to challenge, but when the challenge makes sense, is it safe? Is it smart? And can I manipulate those things to get an outcome that we want? And look at the power of that video. When I go and tell students, and I've spoken to over 100,000, that you can overcome the obstacles in your life, and I understand obstacles, I think that's going to resonate powerfully.
So what is your biggest motivator in life?
Ooh, that's a great question, right? And I think it's this notion that there is so much more great opportunity and possibility ahead as long as I'm trying to move towards it. And when I stop, that's when I'm inviting stagnation, right? And that doesn't mean I'm drive all the time, right? I find the ways to celebrate, to recharge, and all of those things are part of the equation. But I start thinking what's next a lot, which is good because people are going to ask me what's next a lot. But I start thinking what's next because what's important. And what's important to me is I know I was close to quitting, right? I know it was hard. I certainly believe that. And I think, you know, in my case, especially in my new role, there are 22,000 people here in our state alone that might be facing a similar journey, might be thinking those thoughts. And I want them to know, no, you know what, there's a path. You don't have to climb mountains and run marathons or even run a company, but you should know that you can do what's important to you. We just have to work together to help show you the various ways.
Will you write another book?
So yes, I hope so, but I'm a little delayed and a little busy. I actually started trying to write it, and I'll share both pieces of that. And you know, and I started this book. You mentioned the 2016 health challenges. That's when I started writing the book, and I own that in the book in the forward or the afterward. I guess it's the afterward, in which, you know, the medical setback pulled me away. But if it's important, if there's a message that needs to come out, then you want to share that. And in my part of the message, because I've spoken to so many students, people often said, you know, is there a version for a younger generation? And so I had this notion of a book, Autumn Arrives, to talk about her journey and use it in ways that could deliver some of these same messages to the different audience. Unfortunately, I lost my girl Autumn just as COVID began and as I was working on that book, and it took a little steam from my sails. Will I go back to it? I think so. Will I write another book? Well, I mean, there's always a new chapter ahead. So the question is, when do they come out powerfully enough?
So what has been your most challenging goal?
I might be in it. You know, I'm in an organization that's 110 years old, that's so deeply personal to me and so deeply important. But it's a tough world in that, you know, when I tell you those numbers were 4,000 people who are sight impaired in 2010, and I tell you there's 22,000 today. And what do you think is available for state resources to help support that? What has the development dollar done? We have to try to do more with less, and we have to excite people into all the possibilities. You know, our motto is there's a better future in sight when we partner together, but it's work and it's critically important because there's a lot of people who could be affected if I don't succeed. So that is daunting, but it's only daunting because it's the next challenge. And I just take those steps the same way I've taken all the ones before it.
And one final question. Russell writes, mindful change takes incredible courage, which you obviously have. During your darkest moments, can you share the initial conflict of to hell with it as opposed to let's kick butt, and how you choose the latter?
Yeah, that's really powerful. And thank you for that opportunity. And I will share it, and I do share it in the book. So my hardest moment, my lowest moment in life, no doubt in my life, right? So legally blind in 1989, totally blind in 2000, September 14th, into the wheelchair in 2004. And while I'm in the wheelchair, you know, I was already reeling because I'm like, you know, I handled legal blindness pretty well. It was hard. I made some mistakes, but I got going. I handled total blindness better even because of the tools I'd learned. And then I went to the wheelchair and I was making the right choices and working, but it was hard. And while I was in the wheelchair, my guide dog was starting, it was Austin, a golden retriever, to work with me for a guide dog program for how could a guide dog guide a person who's blind and in a wheelchair. And they started a program, and I worked with the organization, Guide Dogs for the Blind, as they were doing that. And we were having success. And my guide dog, Austin, collapsed. He had a cancerous tumor on his heart. And it didn't cause him pain, so there were no real good signs for us. But it split. It split his heart and it split mine. And I'm like, how much do you have to take, right? What's enough? And there's an answer to that question. I'm sorry, I'm emotional, but it's okay to be emotional, right? And the answer to that question is you always get to decide, right? But life is going to be whatever happens, right? You can influence it with all the things you do and you try to do that, but sometimes things happen. And when they do, what you do next is so critically important. And I knew I didn't want to honor his attempt at trying to help me by quitting just because he had to leave me. And honestly, that was part of my motivation. And the second part was I asked the same question I said earlier. What would have happened if I quit at legal blindness, which was a small consideration, or at total blindness, or at the start of the wheelchair? None of the other great things that happened in my life could have been possible if I quit. So I knew I wanted to get to those, no matter how hard it was. So what I believe, right? Nelson Mandela has a quote, don't judge a person, roughly phrasing, don't judge a person by how many times they fall down. Judge them by how many times they get back up. Well, the truth is, I don't want to judge people. And what I want to know, like Russ, is how do you get back up? And my answer is build positive momentum. And how do you do that? Well, start small. I get up someday, even today, right? I might have a bad day. Come on, blind again today. What's the first thing I can do to change that? And for me, it might be a cup of gratitude where I stop and think, what are 3 things about yesterday that I'm grateful about? Because that starts changing your mindset, just like you alluded to. And when you change your mindset, you can change your world, right? But it might be just getting myself a good cup of coffee so I enjoy it. Or it might be team reaching out to one of my friends to say, I need to hear something positive. Can you share that in my life, in your life? What's going on that I can build off of? And if they start to commiserate with me, I might pause them and say, that's not what I need. And if they can't handle that, I might call a different friend. But be accountable. Find what you need to start moving in a positive direction, because then once you're going that way, it's easier to keep going that way. And that's a great final question. I'll ask Renee to flip to my last slide, and I will wrap up here with this. This is the Rainbow Mountain in Peru, and it was beautiful. We had gone to Machu Picchu, which everybody had done, and we said, let's do something different. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate that. And the reason we went here, and I share this photo, is absolutely beautiful, right? And it's making something beautiful out of something also tragic. That wasn't visible because glaciers covered it until the year 2016, 15, somewhere in there. And we get to see that in 2017. And it was so amazing, so beautiful. And people say to me all the time, you're so lucky with all the things you get to do. And there's truth to that. I am fortunate, but it's not just luck, right? John Lennon used to say, life is what happens while we're busy making other plans. And, there's some truth to that in what John says, right? I didn't plan to go blind, but how I reacted to it is probably had the bigger impact. But here's what I believe. John misses the point. Life is most often very much about what we plan. And as I say to students, as I say to everybody, there's a GPA, no, not our grade point average, a GPA that's critical. Build goals, build the positive adversity in your life, make the plan that will get you there. But there's a last step, take action, because that's what makes the difference. When one of my friends says to me, we should get together sometime, I don't say, yeah, that'd be nice. And then it never happens. What I do is I say, great, let's break out your calendar. Let's see when our first availability. And if it's not for 3 months, okay, but it's scheduled. Because if you don't take action, oftentimes what will happen is nothing. And that's the difference for me. So I love my life. I love all the things I've been able to share with you, but I hope this isn't about me. I hope this is about everybody who has a chance to listen, to think about their lives in this way. Because if there are messages here that resonate for you, then maybe you can apply some of them, and maybe you can find for your life that absolutely believing in possibility and striving to achieve it, our peak potential, a vision beyond our sight, is absolutely possible for any of us. And that's my greatest wish for everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Randy. You are truly a remarkable individual, and we so appreciate your sharing your experiences and all of your life's challenges and successes with us. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us as well. This will be recorded. You'll be able to listen to it again very shortly. Thank you.